It is the Rotoballer PGA show, and we just time traveling here as the live button clicked, and we just 13 seconds in the mix for the Procore Championship Parkour Time Machine for the first fall event of the season. Spencer Aguiar, my good friend, you're looking good today. What is up?
Not too much, Byron. It's good to be back. It was nice to have a week break there, but there's, as you can tell with the jersey that you're wearing, we're in the middle of football season right now, and about, I don't know, I mean, we can save this to the end of the show, but about 5 minutes before we went on, I saw Christian McCaffrey was just ruled out for the game. So, yeah.
Woo, baby. So go pick up Jordan Mason, friends. He is going to be a solid play for you if you were looking to handcuff Christian McCaffrey. But this is the PGA show. We can chat about the heartbreak that ensues here in the next hour and a half at the end of the show. We're playing at TPC, Silverado Resort and Spa, where Caleb Williams could potentially get his nails done on the off-season. Spencer, 2 key stats that you will be looking at, honing in on this week at the Procore Championship.
I actually combined the 2 stats that I put together as an individual category that you could run in my model. When you look at this venue, it's very deceptive from a statistical perspective, because you see this venue where last year, 46% of the time, players found the short grass off the tee. But in reality, this is really, to me, a bomb and gouge sort of a mentality that players should take. You have this tree line setup, but it doesn't present quite the difficulty that you might expect, just because of the sporadic spacing of the trees. So I looked at distance, and then I also dove into proximity from within 150 yards. 52.4% of shots are projected to occur from that range. That's 13% higher than a PGA Tour average stop. So those 2 things, you mix that in with some putting with the bent grass POA splits, you got a really short par 72. All of that is kind of what went into the model, but I would say distance and short iron proximity would be the biggest weight for me.
Perfect. It's a different golf course. It's going to be volatile with the fact that you're going to, when you usually have that amount of proximity from so close, Spence, it kind of changes things up a touch, but this field's interesting. And to kind of just get the comments going in the YouTube, for those of you watching the show after the live broadcast, in the comments below, let us know who is going to finish DFL, dead freaking last, or, the other big word in the middle there. And if whoever's the closest, Spencer and I will send those 2 guys a model each. Whoever's the closest, we'll give Spencer, and then second, I'll give you my model. Then we'll flip it around every other week just to do that. And then we'll figure out something here as the live show goes on for the live chat, which we want your questions. We want your concerns. We want your comments. Bring it to us in the chat. We love the chat on the show very much. I know it's a different time. So if you're listening to this in reverse, we usually do this at 9:30 Eastern. We're going to be doing this now, 7 Eastern, kind of leading up into Monday Night Football, because as nice as we are, Spence, no one really wants to watch us instead of football. So we're going to have to kind of deal with that going forward. So fun stuff going into this week. I think, Spence, looking for guys in some decent form, especially at the top of the board. There's, some distinguishing factors there that we can chat about. And then going into the bottom there, got to be able to hit in the fairways and then make sure those wedges are looking tidy, making sure you can chip and get up and down. Just pretty much a simple situation outside of the proximity numbers there. So pretty simple situation going into this renamed event. Take a breather. Let's have ourselves a nice episode. Spencer, we don't have any graphics. Reschedule time. Didn't have enough time to get there. But who's your number 10 guy, and why is he number 10 for you?
Number 10 player for me is, I just talked about distance, and you have mentioned a million times about this golfer, Byron, where he's tall. You would think he would hit the ball far, and he has absolutely no distance to speak of. And it was very interesting to see Brendan Todd from me grade 10th overall. It's very in tune to where the market is. And I think you have a position here where safety markets, and you're going to get that just with the course history that we're talking about. 3 consecutive top 22 finishes at this course. You mix that in with the recent form. If you date this back to the John Deere, nothing worse than a 46. He has multiple finishes there, about 4 of them inside the top 31. So I think this is a nice safe play where the price tag is fair for him. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm aggressively trying to back him or I'm super engaged with this play here, but I do think the price tag is fair for whatever it's worth. And let's see where the ownership lands from there before we kind of make more of a concrete decision of where we want to move with this.
No, I fancy Todd quite a lot, Spence. He grades out nicely for this specific golf course. Given his height and what should be a distance advantage, his lack of and increased accuracy is definitely a big factor at a venue like this, hence his solid finishes here in the past. So I'm a big fan of Brendan Todd. Granted, I don't think I'd ever find me betting Brendan Todd to win a golf tournament under the sun, but price-wise, there's some value to be had over there. The same thing goes with Eric Cole, my number 10 guy. Don't think he's ever going to win a tournament. Every time he's got in the mix, tends to kind of fizzle away, kind of crumble under the pressure there. I think last year, this was the last time I think I ever bet Eric Cole to win the tournament, was when he was looking like he was going to do it, was putting lights out all week. And I think he lost like 2 strokes in the final round to kind of finish second or third to Sahith. So just couldn't quite keep up with him when the pressure builds up. And I was following up the John Deere Classic, same situation. So like him from a DFS aspect, $8,700, very fair, affordable kind of situation. But playing some good golf, I'll take a gamble on him to kind of finish second to whoever finishes first in the rest of the player pool. So that's kind of my strategy with Eric Cole. I'll hit you with my next guy who also hasn't had a top 5 finish this year. It's Keith Mitchell. I like him for, cash game plays potentially a bit more than where we're kind of leaning into Keith Mitchell here for his safety ranking is 4th for me. His upside is 9th. So if that's any indicator of where this guy's golf game lies, not having finished inside the top 5 with the stats that he has. I mean, he's 6th in the field in strokes gained total. Where's that top 5 finish, Keith? Cashmere outside the top 5. That's what's going on with old Killer Keith over here. So I like him, but not for the upside bets. I'd probably be playing him a bit more cash, potentially playing him for a top 20 bet. So who have you got, Spence, in the 9 hole?
Yeah, I will say very quickly about Keith Mitchell, the statistical portion of my model, which is not a shocker. Like Eric Cole and Keith Mitchell, your 9 and 10 there are about the very standard 2 names that you can find up my sheet when they're producing good results and the form looks proper. You get these very interesting returns in my sheets. And, Mitchell specifically, number 1 for me from par 4 scoring between 400 to 450 yards. Number 1 for me in recent strokes gained tee to green. The putter has question marks. That's always the concern with it. But I like Keith Mitchell in any of those markets that you just talked about. It's just the problem that we have specifically right now, and we can talk about this with a player as we even work further up the board that I actually like more, is there are certain players where I'm going to say books are savvy. Like books have gotten savvy to this. And I understand that we don't think Cole and Mitchell are going to win, but from a statistical perspective, their numbers look great. The problem is the sports books see the same numbers. They skew these prices down into these 35 to 1 or less totals to where you don't necessarily have value at those totals. This would be a much different conversation in my mind about both of those 2 players if we were getting them 70 to 1 to win this golf tournament, because then I think you can actually bet on some of this lack of upside that we've seen, but they've been priced out of the market. If one of them wins, congratulations to the books for pulling that off. But for my number 9 player, I'm going to go with KH Lee. He was 80 to 1 to open today. That number has been drifting around at different shops depending on where you're trying to find him. That was one of the first outright bets that I placed. I talked at the beginning of the show. I looked at proximity from 0 to 150 yards, and I looked at driving distance. I added those 2 categories together. KH Lee graded 4th for me in my model this week. I think we have a really high upside sort of play here with KH Lee to where, I'm interested to see how the market reacts both for DFS purposes and matchups. There's very little out there to understand where he's going to be ownership wise or, where he's going to move matchup wise. But I thought here for a golfer that was 7,900, I would probably make an argument that value wise, he was my favorite play on the board for what you're getting from an upside standpoint there.
Yeah, I've got him in the 78, 88 range there for safety and upside, and he's priced 22nd in DFS. So for you, Spence, I think that's definitely some serious value at $7,900. We've seen this guy, the big sexy, back-to-back times. There's a comp course that I used this week. It's TPC Craig Ranch. He's won 66% of tournaments that have taken place at that venue, 67 if you round up a touch. So I like KH Lee if you like KH Lee, and as a leverage option, I think that's the way to go there. So who are you going with for your number 8 golfer this week, Spencer?
I think for me specifically, like when we talk about this, a lot of what goes into my overall rankings, because I think when you give us your rankings, Byron, you're talking about it from an upside perspective, correct?
Yes.
So
It's
I'm giving
DFS. So,
that, and that's
that's why I'm using upside.
yeah, I think that's a very fair way to look at it. I'm going from an overall rank from it.
Okay.
You can get the upside numbers from within my model. And when you look at here, and I think this from like a DFS answer, which is where I would stand in agreement with you. I have KH Lee number 9. I have Mac Meisner number 8. Now, if we're talking for DFS here, I do think I would rather shoot for the upside that KH Lee has if we're just saying you have to pick one of these two names. But with all that being said, he is still a top 8 player for me. He's inside of the top 12 in pretty much any iteration of my model that I'm talking about. There are a handful of players that I'm very interested to see how they perform during this fall swing, because we got bits and pieces of the flashing that they put together in 2024. And we're going to get weaker field for them in a lot of these starts. And I think Meisner is one of those names that, with his ball striking answers and some of the potential that he has for this course, I do think that there's real upside to be had. Like, I don't want this to be an argument between KH Lee and Mac Meisner, because I think both of them are playable in this spot. And I would argue that I would probably rather play both of them than Brendan Todd, just because of Brendan Todd's lack of the upside that he has in my model. But I think Meisner was, there's essentially 3 names for me. We can talk about them as we traverse through this show. But Meisner was one of the 3 options that I did not place an outright ticket on for one reason or another, which the reason ended up being I just liked other options better and I didn't want to overexpose my card. But he is one of 3 names that fit onto that list. The other one was Chan Kim. And then there is one that we'll talk about later that I really like this week. And I'm afraid that I've talked about this numerous times. There are certain players. You think of Davis Thompson, you think of Aaron Rye, you think of all these names that have been reduced price-wise during the weeks that they've won golf tournaments. I'm a little bit afraid that there might be another name on that list that I did not get to, but we can talk about that in a second.
Spencer, I love it when you tease me with the good time, especially down the board. That's where the fun happens, because, those are the guys that sometimes are ready to explode onto the scene. Like this is the tournament outside of like Sahith, Wyndham, and Max and Corey call it. Like there really aren't any big names in this event. So if those 4 guys stumble, it's up for grabs from the rest of the clan. So I think there's something to be said about that for sure. And speaking of stumbling, Maverick McNeely is typically one of those guys, always finding himself now in the mix, playing some really solid, very consistent golf. Every time you find him at the top of the board on a Sunday, one of the better putters on tour lands up being one of the worst putters on a Sunday, or when 3-putting from a random situation, not making a clutch 8-footer. Like he's going to have to really get comfortable with those situations. And I fear that when he does get comfortable enough, I'm not going to be on him. But at the same time, in a field like this, I'm not too tempted by his betting outright ticket. But at $9,400, I'll take it. Like he can potentially be your second guy in, and we go with that. I think I've got a lot of second place guys in this top 10 of my model. So I think he's someone that I'm kind of looking to key in on there. And then who I will be pairing him with in these kind of lineups is Minwoo Lee. I think he might be a bit of a less owned option this week. Doesn't provide you the safety that you're looking for. I wouldn't never play Minwoo in a cash game lineup, but in GPPs, when this guy finishes inside the top 20, he's done a top 10 finish every other time. Like every single time he's finished inside the top 20, he's also finished inside the top 10. We've seen this guy at the Cognizant Classic. These shorter courses, he's got so much power off the tee. He can almost bypass that pitching wedge range, Spencer, and get himself into a pitch, like a literal pitch from 50 yards away, where his short game can be leaned on a little bit more, So he's a high volatility guy. I think he's going to be fun to watch the President's Cup in particular because of the distance carries that you need to avoid some disasters out there. So we'll chat about that in 2 weeks' time. But Minwoo Lee, high upside for me, very low floor. We'll see what he can get up to before the President's Cup.
Yeah, Minwoo's the perfect president's candidate, specifically when you can put it in an event where you're taking on the Americans, and the Americans always try to, they stack a team that is a certain skill set. Now, maybe not so much this go around with it, but like when we think of these American golfers where they find success, specifically when you have to put them in a matchup against each other, you think of distance, you think of long iron proximity, you think of players that can get hot with their short game at times. And that's the Min-Woo Lee recipe, to where he is extremely volatile. You don't exactly know what you're going to get from him from day to day, but the upside at any given moment, like if I was just taking a random shot, like I almost, if I got the ability to put Min-Woo against who I would want him to be against as the international side there, like I almost would rather just say, like, play against Scotty and hope that you go nuclear for 18 holes, and that's my ace in the hole. If he puts it together, great. If he doesn't, we were going to lose the match anyway. But I have always been higher than public consensus, I would say, on Min-Woo at the end of the day.
Yes. And as you say that, Darbo showing up for the first comment of the show. We are 16 minutes in, people. I'm seeing 30 of you watching this stuff. You better be hitting that like button if you're not commenting, just saying. But Darbo, we appreciate you showing up in the comments section over here. I'm sassy because, I'm a little nervous about this evening. But Spencer, who's your number 7 ranked golfer this week?
Every time my model has done this, and there's not very many times, but every time it's done it, this has not worked out correctly. I'm 0 for 2 technically in these spots, so take this for whatever it's worth. It's a small sample size, but Rico Hoey popped in my model this week in a lot of ways of how I ran it. He was 10th for me in weighted scoring. He was the number 1 player for me in par 5 average. And he ended up dropping a little bit when I weighted the par 5s for this course. Depending on where you can find that outright number, I do think that there's some consideration with him. Like this is another one of those golfers that we've been talking about that was trending in the right direction during certain portions of the end of the year. And for one reason or another, some of these names are going to be more popular than others. And I'm actually going to take it into the next name I have above him, which is Maverick McNeely, because McNeely is one of those guys that I've talked about, to where the sports books have been super, we'll call it sharp, in just reducing these prices. And it's an unfortunate thing here with Maverick, where to me, he's unbettable at 22-1, but it's kind of like you said, Byron, this DFS answer is a completely different story here. And I'm going to feel a lot of regret when he ends up winning this golf tournament, because like the way that I compared this is when I took my projected win equity and I was trying to figure out what was fair, 22 was not the number I was looking for. I was hoping I could get a 33, 35. And like, if you directly compare him to JJ Spawn in my model, him and Spawn are not that much different from one another. There's some very minor deviations between the two, to where, I'll be talking about JJ Spawn in a second. I think for whatever this answer is worth, I know Maverick hasn't won, but I do think Maverick has a little bit more upside than JJ for this particular course. But the problem is one of them opened at 40-1, one of them opened at 22-1. I'm stuck in this spot to where I can't get there on Maverick because books have priced us out. But this has kind of been the common sentiment that we've run across over and over again, to where I keep saying every single week, and I've said it 3 times already on the show, books are getting sharper. And I do think Maverick is one of those potential choices there, to where does Maverick find his best success? He finds it on these really easy, straightforward courses. Is he able to get a putter going for 4 days? As you mentioned, he hasn't on Sunday when he's been in contention, but it's kind of the Xander narrative, which it's a little bit different with it. It's like, you can't win until you win. And Finau experienced that for so many years. And I do believe that we might be in an opportunity here that when Maverick finally does get across the finish line, I wouldn't be surprised to see him string a bunch of results together. Like if you think of the West Coast swing, when we start 2025 here, there are a lot of prime spots for him where he can find success. Like, I don't know, like Pebble Beach, for example, is one of those courses to where if he's there, like that is an ideal tournament for him. So, the field strength and all that will matter, but I really like Maverick McNeely this week. And if there's somebody that ends up burning me that I don't have on my outright card, I'm kind of afraid it's him.
I know. It's a situation, Spencer, where I'm feeling the same way, and I almost just want to hedge that emotional vulnerability with a top 5 bet on Mav.
Yeah.
No, that might not be the worst way to go about it either, but I'll be looking to get over the field on him, particularly he's been so consistent for the price tag we're getting, like Corey Connors. I think he's he's basically the same version of Corey Connors, but he's got a few more top fives than Corey. Corey hasn't finished inside the top five in the last 12 months. So tough situation there for the Canadian President's Cup player. But Spencer, this week is a West Coast kind of a golf course, right? We're playing in California, right? This is, in the Napa Valley area. Mav on the West Coast, man. Like, I think that is where he will win his first tournament, is on like POA greens, I would imagine, because he's very, very good on POA surfaces. And I think, like you mentioned, it's tough because you want to sprinkle these guys that are like losers and just never get it done, but at like 50-1, like, give me that. I'll just kind of round out my card with a 50-1 Mav. And if he gets across the line, I've got other guys that kind of faulted, obviously, but at what you said, 25, like, this is a range that's just, it's tough to get to in a situation like this when there's other better golfers in the field that you probably lean on a bit more in that particular range. So we'll see. Speaking of guys that just does not want to get into the top 10, but will just live religiously inside the top 20, it's Tom Hoagie. And when you put on Tom Hoagie on POA surfaces, I mean, he won at Pebble and putts quite nicely over there too. So we'll see what Tom can get up to. Obviously, one of the better ball strikers in this field. Looking at what he's been up to the last little while, the putter can get very, very shaky at times. But I like this kind of surface for Tom. It kind of potentially lets the rest of the field come back to him when it comes to the putting side of things. And, he'll ball strike this place to absolute death. And I don't really like him on longer courses. I like him on these kind of, what you like to say, pitch and putt type venues, Spencer. You do your pitch and putt metrics. And I think Tom Hoagie can really start finding his groove there. He's playing golf. I mean, the guy was at the Tour Championships, and here he is in the Napa Valley. I guess there's some nice casinos and nice wine farms down there that Tom Hoagie's likely going to be looking into. But I've been making a living off betting this guy top 20. But the last few results, they're not quite like, this ranking is coming from a bit more of a long-term basis than his recent form kind of warrants. So put that into perspective there for you guys. But from a DFS GPP perspective, if he's low owned, he's the kind of guy that can pop and just finish inside, finish 11th for you kind of thing. So we'll see what Tom can get up for us. And then we go from Mav to Mac. Mackenzie Hughes, number 4 in the model for me. This guy is a ridiculously good putter. And I think at a venue like this, we saw Sahith win this tournament just putting out of his brackets. And I think Mackenzie Hughes can chip and putt his way around because he ain't got the ball striking, that's for sure. He's 88th in the field in ball striking, but number uno when it comes to short game. And I think that's going to be fun to watch Mackenzie Hughes, Spencer. Little President's Cup nugget for you guys. You can hit 13 short game shots at this year's President Cup venue. All 4 par 3s are on odd holes. So irons can be taken completely out of Mackenzie's hands. 5 approach shots needed. You can have 13 short game shots, chips or putts. Whichever one, Mackenzie is one of the best in the world when it comes to that, especially the putting. So give me an $8,100 Mackenzie Hughes. I've got him ranked 4th. His DFS ranking at $8,100 is 19th. So I'm seeing some really solid value there. And we can see this guy absolutely get it together when he shines, So volatile, but I like it because people might not be clicking his name as much in the $8,100 range. Yeah, who have you got, Spence?
So I've talked a lot about JJ Spawn so far this week. And I guess my one concern for him would be that he experienced this month-long break probably at the most inopportune time for what he was putting together. He had 6 consecutive made cuts, back-to-back top 9 finishes. That's always going to be one of the drawbacks of an informed golfer who doesn't end up qualifying for the FedEx Cup playoffs. I remain really optimistic, though, about how his skill set fits a venue like this. So he leads the field with 20 consecutive rounds of shooting par or better. I'm going to bet on this second place output that I had in my model for the strokes gained over the past 24 rounds. That only trailed one player, and the one player that it trailed just so happened to be a player that I don't have very much data on, which is Luke Clanton, and that's kind of like the model breaker for me. And I don't go in and regress any of the stats for him. So he's only behind one player there. And then if you want to look at where he does his best work, it's usually these accessible scoring facilities that end up allowing more wayward drives off the tee. I talked about it at the beginning of the show. In 2023, only 46% of fairways were hit here. I just think that this gives him a different sort of aggression. He's not necessarily the best driver of the ball, but a venue like this allows for more aggression. And you add that to where the putter here is very on par with where it would be at other places. You don't see a drawback. And a lot of what we've gotten from him recently to get this upside return from him over the last handful of starts would be this putter that ranks inside the top 25 of the field over his last 24 rounds. So the one concern would be that he might be very popular and has not played golf in a month. I think the upside to that answer, though, is that this is a very informed golfer before he took the break, a golfer that has the skill sets to find success at this venue. And there's a very specific blueprint that I'm trying to locate. And he just so happens to be one of those names that lands smack dab in the middle there. And it's the comparison that I was making. You compare him to Maverick McNeely. I think they're very similar. I'd very slightly rather have Maverick if price tags didn't matter and I could pick my own price here. But when one's 22-1 in Maverick and one's 40-1 in JJ Spawn, I ended up taking the value on Spawn. And a lot of that came down to also of what I did at the top of the board, which we'll get to in a second.
Yeah, because I think obviously you got to play the bottom of the board. How you play the bottom of the board is how you play the top, right? Dependent on. So apologies, by the way. I think I left out my number 6 golfer and I've just completely skipped him, but his name is Max Homa and I'm not interested at all to kind of deal with him anyway. So Max is my number 6. I think JJ was your number 6, Spence?
JJ was my 5. McNeely was my 6.
Perfect. Okay. So who is your number 4 hole?
So it's Luke Clanton. And I do think, in all fairness to this, I would rather play Spawn and McNeely. It's such a limited sample size of data. My model really likes what we've seen from Clanton. There's these boom or bust results from a statistical profile that has in sheet. Some of the high-end marks place him number 1 across the board in a lot of areas. Some of the low-end marks with some of the short game stuff is not quite as good. I think he's a really good golfer. I'm very happy that he entered this tournament. The more starts that he can get in, the better. This is a legitimate PGA Tour player that the moment we get him full-time on tour, the tour will get better. I think it's a fair price tag. I have nothing against him at the end of the day. It's just I would rather play Spawn and McNeely when making choices, but I don't have a problem with the price tag, and I don't necessarily even have a problem with my ranking, if I'm being honest.
No, but I think the price tag and his overall ranking that the majority of DFS players will experience, I think he's going to be very popular this week, Spencer.
You're probably correct. I think Maverick's going to be popular too, and that's the problem is you're going to get this really, in my opinion, this very popular range here from those 3 names, and you're going to have to pick and choose. And that's just from a projection standpoint. That's kind of where I'm landing. I don't want to play the 3 most popular players in the $9,000 section when I'm also going to probably attack the board in a very standard way to what everybody else is going to be doing there. And you have to find a way to get unique and different somewhere with it. And, the Max Homa answer that you just talked about, I ran something in my model, and this is not advocating to play Max Homa, by the way. I can certainly understand, though, how you got to the answer that you did, or your model got to the answer that it did with Max Homa. One of the things that I always have been adding to my DraftKings article over at Rotoballer is I take a better than expected weighted form versus, that's not the right way to word it. I essentially take a weighted form for the course that we're playing in comparison to the recent form. That's the more simplistic way. I think that makes sense, Byron, of what we're looking for. So I'm trying to find the players that have the better potential to find success for the venue that they're playing versus what their recent projections have been over the last 24 rounds. We talk a lot about how the market reacts to good form and bad form. And sometimes there's that overcorrection that comes into play. Now, Homa's been bad for so long that's what we want. I want to preface all of that with this. But the number 1 player for me, when we were looking at better than expected form for this course, and this is what happens, and this is why you win a tournament in back-to-back years over the last 3 years. He ended up being a top 15 player for me in expected strokes gained total for this venue, where if you look at all other venues, he was outside of the top 75 from what we've gotten recently. And maybe Homa's broken. I will say with no ownership, this is one of those unique opportunities, with him and Justin Thomas. where you can potentially take a shot, like maybe on it, but I mean, I don't know if I can get there. It's just, I wanted to just throw that out there because we've gotten this a couple times. Keegan Bradley during his victory was another one of those options to where he was, I didn't get him in the outright market, but I did play him for DFS because he was the number one player for me in that area. I like Darbo just said it. He's having problems. I mean, he's having problems with everything, for being honest. Like, he's having mental breakdowns on the course, unfortunately.
Right.
And the game has gone south for him, and the mindset might not be there. But, you know, there are some happy, sweet spots. And it's kind of that, it's that narrative that we talk about of what is most important, course history or current form. And I always say current form. I'm always the proponent that give me the player with current form. But when the market doesn't want to react to course history, I always kind of get somewhat intrigued. It's too high of a price tag for him, but I would rather play McNeely and Spawn, even if we drop further down on the board. But he kind of starts entering that mix with the rest of the names if I'm trying to randomly throw a dart. And I know what I'm signing up for. Like, the downside here is what we've gotten for the last 6 months here, it feels like.
Well, you know, Happy Gilmore, you got to go to your happy place. And I think Napa is one of Max Homer's. I mean, he's won twice here. You know, it's like basically Quail Hollow for him in a way. So if there were a place, Spencer, if you were to say, okay, give me 3 venues, 3 top 3 locations that Max Homer finds his game. Silverado Resort has to be one of the top 3, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be this, Quail Hollow, and I mean, somewhere where he can maybe scramble himself around and kind of not strike the ball perfectly. But this has been, I mean, you don't win back-to-back years, and you know, there is that potential. And we always even talk about this during the off season here, which is not much of an off season, but there is more of an off season for certain players than other. And Darbo just talked about it in the chat. Like, sometimes a quick reset, even if it's just a couple weeks, a month. We've seen Hovland do it at portions of the year. Thomas kind of put it together through stretches too. Look at Justin Thomas. Like, Justin Thomas was a player that couldn't find success, really, was kind of struggling over and over again. And you noted that he was a golfer that could find success at the Tour Championship. And, you know, he ended up being fine there. So I think this is a spot where Homa can find success at this venue. And I just hate the price tag, but with that price tag becomes reduced ownership. And that's where the fun comes into play.
Exactly. It's safe to say no one's going to be Max Homer's cash ownership is going to be like 4%, 2%. You know what I'm saying? Like, GPP will be a different situation. You know, I think if it's in that single digit range, maybe even before it gets into the teens, then we're looking at a golfer who finds himself, you know. And the thing is, Spencer, I don't know if it's necessarily got to do with his swing, so to speak, more so than his ability to repeat the swing mentally. You know, like, he finds himself just making an 8 out of nowhere, just hitting 2 out of bounds at Castle Heights or whatever that place is we just played. Like, I think that's the problem. He has his blow up holes. Maybe finding himself on a course that's a bit more comfortable and just really, I'm kind of running around in circles here, but that's the kind of stuff you have to tell yourself when you're going to a guy that no one wants to play at a $10,000 price tag. So,
well, I mean, he gained 6.5 strokes at the BMW Championship. We've talked about the wide open nature of this facility. He loses 8.8 strokes off the tee at Castle Pines, but this is one of those venues that, sure, if you go so wayward off the tee, you can get yourself trapped behind trees and everything like that. But there's also the potential that if you just miss to the correct side, you can play from out of the rough. And, you know, that's what Homa does so well at his very best, is being able to put himself in the right spot. And I think that we have seen historically he does that at this course. So, look, I'm not going to bet him at the outright total that we're talking about, but when we have no ownership around him, it's a different story to be had.
Yeah, that outright number is disgusting. That's where the books just say, you know what, we see you, but we don't feel you, and we don't care about what you guys want to do, because, you know, what would you bet Max Homer at for an outright number, Spencer?
I can tell you what's proper if you give me a second. Like, I might, well, so I have proper at 60, which might even be better than like market consensus there, I would assume.
Yeah, I'd say like 40 would be fair for me. I might consider it. You know, it's not going to hemorrhage your equity in your card. And I think leaning into that course history, I think that's worth it. So yeah, anywhere between those would be fine for me. Your number 3 golfer, Spencer?
So I have Eric Cole here. This is the model breaker every single go around with it. You talked about Cole. I don't think I need to say much that I say every single week here. I feel like we have this answer all the time. It is a very good course fit for him. Like if you're not going to be long and you're not going to be straight off the tee, like this is probably one of those more forgiving venues where he can actually use his proximity play. He can use his putter inside of my model. And that was enough to put him into this range to where, he's a top 5 projected win equity candidate for me. I know we talk about all the answers of why he cannot win and why Maverick McNeely cannot win, but I do think if those guys are to win, it comes at one of these straightforward courses to where you can be erratic off the tee. So I didn't get there in the outright market on Cole. I did think the price tag, though, was very nice at 8,700. He's a golfer for me that you could put him right there in the Clanton, McNeely sort of range. Corey Connors, like I think he's right in that section one way or another.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible to see what he's been up to. I mean, he's sitting here, I think, 6th in the field in top 10 rate. So, I mean, he's been popping a lot, and I think he's really moving in the right direction. Let's see what Eric Cole can do. It's always fun to kind of see what these guys get up to, like, what are they going to give us this week? These golfers are like, it's so fun that we bet on golfers, Spencer. Like, you can bet on Tyreek Hill, you can bet on Justin Jefferson, Garrett Wilson. These guys are they're likely going to give you a result that's expected. Like the outliers on these like NFL players and things is just so much less likely than golf. Like, why do we bet on the sport, man? Like the volatility of these dudes is just incredible. So I don't know. It's just fun to kind of think about that. My number 3 golfer, Spencer, is Corey Connors. And it comes from an upside world that I just mentioned doesn't have any top 5s, but boy, oh boy, does Corey Connors have top 10s. So again, I think I'm going to have to just leverage around the next 2 guys I mentioned because that's where we're going to be. And Corey Connors for me is he's a great supporting cast. Might as well call him Robin to your number 1 Batman. Like I think at this price tag, 9,800, you can probably sneak him in behind another 10K option and get different there and see what's going on. But I like him for his safety. The model's telling me he's got edge at top 20 at -170, but I don't trust him to do that. He's been playing great here though the last little while. I lay heavy juice on Xander Schauffele and Scotty Scheffler, 2 best golfers in the world. That's it. I don't do it anywhere else. So that's kind of just how I've been going. We'll see what he can get up to. Number 2 for me is Wyndham Clark. So no surprise here. I mean, between him and Sahith, they're probably the 2 best golfers in the field currently, form-wise as well. Sahith, obviously, we can chat about what he's got up to. But Wyndham, starting to find some form, Spence, kind of grinding his way around. BMW Championship, Tour Championship was a little here and there. But again, that's such a goofy format. You're not quite sure what you're going to get from anyone that week apart from Scotty. Even Xander let us down in a big way. Just kind of backdoored that top 5 there. Thank God for some people. But Wyndham Clark, if you're looking for short game, looking for putting, I mean, the guy gained 1 million strokes at Pebble Beach, so if we're going to expect similar putting conditions this week, there we go. How much are you leaning into Poa versus Poa Bent this week, Spencer? I guess that's another question I have.
I put it, the split together in my model of every time we got one of those occurrences with it, and then a little infusion of just Poa alone on it. It's an interesting discussion to be had because I do think a correct model is going to be Theegala, Clark, Theegala, whichever order you decide to put them in. And the one thing I will say, and take it for what it's worth, I would personally, if I'm comparing, let's remove Wyndham Clark for a second. There's matchups out there with them versus other players. I do think it's interesting. You just talked about Corey Connors. I would personally rather, if I was to take a matchup of the 2, I think I would rather have Theegala than Connors. It's a very slight lean one way or another, but I will say markets are starting to push in the direction of Corey Connors. I've already seen it move 5 to 10 points at most books. And I think most of that early movement is usually sharp movement there. So not something that I'm going to have a lean on one way or another. I don't necessarily have a viewpoint, but what it does do in my model, and when I look at this tournament, is it starts pushing me in this direction to where when I looked at this board, Wyndham Clark is kind of this discussion point of what to do, because two things happen specifically in my mind for him, and one involves what Theegala has just done. So Theegala entered the Tour Championship. I took him at the BMW Championship, and he came dead last in the tournament. And then I ended up fading him because I thought he actually had concerns with the wrist, and he ends up coming second on the shadow or the non-stroke leaderboard there. And so all of a sudden now we get this correction that comes into play. I understand he's second in my model, but a lot of people want to back him, and he's the most popular guy. He's the outright price to win. All of that ends up entering the mix. But what ends up happening to me here is that Wyndham actually ends up being the one that sees this drift in price that is the most substantial of any of those names. Maybe it's the lack of upside. Well, that's a fine answer to give, that he has not been great here. 2 missed cuts and 2 finishes that are subpar over the last 4 years. But I think this is one of those situations that I don't want anybody to just look at course history here and say that this is not a venue that he likes. Wyndham had a surge in 2023 where he became a major championship golfer. He became a top 10 player in the world. He became something that he wasn't for his entire career. And when I went back and I looked, because I was curious to see where my model had him in those 4 iterations of the tournament, that 2022 tournament where he finished in 43rd place was the best projection I had of him. I had him 25th overall in my model. Every one of the other 3 times, I had him outside of the top 40. And some of those missed cuts, I had him outside of the top 80 of my sheet, where a missed cut was a very fair result, according to my sheet of what we should have gotten. You think about distance and short iron proximity and that skill set that comes into play. It's Wyndham. When you think about a golfer that's in form right now that might not be getting credit in the market, it's Wyndham. I actually think Wyndham should be the favorite in this tournament. And this is one of those positions to me where Theegala gets the slight boost in the market because of what he did at the Tour Championship, mixed with him being the defending champion. All very noteworthy and credible reasons for why he is. But I think Wyndham is going to be the golfer for me where I am going to be the most aggressive with. He was 16-1. I don't know if he's still there right now, but he was 16-1 at Bet365 when that opened this morning in one of their boosted markets. And I thought that was the best bet on the entire board if you had access to that. And I would even argue at the 12-1 total, there might be a little bit of meat left on that bone. And, Wyndham has been somebody who's been very generous to me when I have backed him in an outright. It doesn't mean that he necessarily wins every single time I take him, but I do feel like in a lot of the spots where I have chosen him over some of these other spots, we've got incredible results. So I'm going to be very aggressive to him this week. He is going to almost certainly be my highest owned golfer on the slate when it's all said and done. And a lot of that just comes down to, I think he's too cheap in all markets this week.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to bet at a 6x return and get really aggressive with your situation, a Wyndham Clark Sahith Theegala ticket I'm contemplating, because I've got a Sahith outright placed already, and then my other bet is a 275-1 option. So that's basically just, for fun almost, but there's value to that too, in my opinion. I'll chat about him as we go down the gourmet cray ranges. Yeah. But if you want to go, these two dudes they substantially better than anyone else in the field at this moment. I think, why not just take the 2 best guys and just call it a day and just take a bit of a gamble on that? And, I don't know how to win an outright, so I might as well just take the 2 best guys in the field and then just go from there. I feel like in this field, they shouldn't really be playing in this field anyway. They're doing so, one, because he's the defending champ, but also they're tuning up for the President's Cup, so this is the situation that we're dealing with. So I don't mind them. We'll see where we can go. Obviously, Sahith Theegala for me, number 1 in the model. Spencer, go ahead and chat about Sahith. What is he to you? What you got him number 2 though, right?
I have him number 2. I think they're the 1A, 1B, no matter how you want to shake it. It's like, obviously I talked a lot about Wyndham and why I'm going to play him, but Sahith is inside of the top 12 in pretty much every critical portion of my model of what I was trying to find. And one of the answers I always talk about, and this was I bet him here last year. And what I always talk about with Theegala is I want to find weighted proximity for a specific course that is better than his long-term projection elsewhere. And there are a handful of courses where he provides that, and that's usually where he generates the success. But this is one of those venues where he's a top 45 projected iron player, where he's outside the top 90 at most other places. I've talked about the ability to spray the ball off the tee a little bit. I think he can spray the ball off the tee. But one thing I will say, and this is not necessarily meant to be a deterrent away from betting him to win, when I look specifically in field strength matters and how a player grades compared to the field matters inside of my sheet, but he is about 15 to 25 spots, depending on exactly how I ran my model, worse in projected proximity this week than he was last year for this tournament. So it's a little bit worse with the iron play. And I guess my one concern would be that is what ends up keeping him off of the podium of going back to back with it. But, look, Max Homa went back to back right before he has. This has been a tournament that's been able to produce results like that. I guess part of my problem at the very core of this answer is just that this price went from, I think without that Tour Championship result, he's probably in that 12, 14 to 1 range. And if you shop around, you can find better prices on Theegala, but there are numbers out there where he's like 9, 10, 11 to 1. And that is my biggest concern. Like I would not grab those prices. I think you've missed out on every bit of value there. And for me, I would have rather this have been somewhere in that like 20 to 22 to 1 range, which we were never going to get with him being the defending champion. And we were never going to get with after what he did at the Tour Championship. And I do think over the next 12 months, when we look back on everything that's occurred, Theegala, maybe of any of those non-major champions, might, and Oberg is a different answer here because Oberg's already thought of as an elite golfer, but Hovland's already thought of as an elite golfer. I wouldn't be shocked if we come back around here in 12 months and Theegala is viewed every bit in that same range as a lot of those players, as a legitimate top 7, 8, 10 sort of fixture on tour. And I'm very bullish to his potential over the next 12 months. I think this is a very nice course fit for him. I just am a little concerned that the number, depending on if you can find a number that's boosted, it might be a little bit too low at some shops.
I think you brought up an interesting point, Spencer. Do you have Sahith's last year's stats going into the tournament? Like, what was he ranked off the tee? Because, I wonder if there's some sort of correlation between wedge proximity numbers versus improvement off the tee with a driver, because they're two totally different swings. Like, if you think about a lob wedge in your hand versus a driver, you're standing so much closer, you're taking way bigger of a divot. The fundamentals of the swing are still going to be there, but there's some nuances about how far you're standing away from the ball speed, and maybe the more ball speed you have, the less your wedges kind of perform. What do you think, of that? I mean, he's top 10 in the field in strokes gained off the tee this week, where imagine I told you that last year, you would have laughed in my face. Like, there's no way. I would have laughed in your face if you told me that. Like, he's made such a massive turnaround off the tee with his driver. I think, you can take a minor sacrifice with the wedge play that he's kind of lost. He was once upon a time one of the best wedge players in the world. Now,
Byron, I don't know if you're muted on my end or I've lost sound to you on it. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me yet?
I cannot hear you right now. I don't know if that's something on my end, but as we try to figure this out, I'll give the Theegala answer very quickly here. So, I actually graded Theegala a little bit better. It might be on my end, then I might have to jump out of this after this answer, Byron, and jump back into the chat here. But I'll give this Theegala answer very quickly before I do. So I had Theegala as the 32nd projected driver in my model for the tournament last year, which is so much better than the projection would have deemed that like most people would have had. This go around here, I have him inside of the top 20. So he is a better expected driver, and maybe that is where like this can even be a better result for him. But I'll let you touch on that. I'm going to hop out. I'm going to hop back in. Hopefully we can get this sorted. But I mean, it's almost Monday Night Football anyway, so we'll let everybody get out of here shortly.
Cool. Well, since y'all can hear me, let's go ahead and chat about Sahith. Like I said, the driving's been amazing. The putting, he loves this golf course. He knows how to score, and he's scrappy. I think Sahith this week, just a super scrappy dude. Him and Scrappy Doo. I think Wyndham and Scrappy are going to do just fine for me if I go both at 12-1 and kind of just leave the card right there, along with another guy we'll mention once Spencer gets back in the building. Yeah. But it's a remarkably changed golfer. The putting stats, when you take a look at his average putting versus his median putting, is a big difference. Like the more Sahith Theegala, you take a look at what he's been up to with the putter, it's like volatile. It's all sides of the spectrum, where that's a bad putting performance, I don't care about. Like if you're betting this guy to win the tournament, if he's lost 5 strokes putting at the Wells Fargo, whatever, like I don't need him to be like, that's what his weapon is. He's putting upside. For someone who's ranked 44th in the field in putting, he's probably one of the best putters in the field if you just take a look at him when he's putting the best. And that's the thing that I like the most about him is his consistency isn't going to show through unless you're looking at the ball striking side of things. His short game is so spicy and volatile that when he does that kind of stuff, he can win because of the short game, but he can also miss cuts because of his short game. It's just a weird situation that he finds himself in. I think that's the thing that we're dealing with here when it comes to models. And for him to still be number one for me is good. So I like that a lot. I'm glad you can hear me, Spencer. Good. Welcome back to the pod. That's what the hell is technology about? We kind of streaming Christian McCaffrey's calf muscle into the feed here. I don't know. So anything more you want to mention about Wyndham Clark before we get into a few gourmet cray options?
No, the only thing I'll add to the Sahith part of the discussion is it's kind of the same thing as Maverick McNeely. California kid, plays well on POA. We've seen this historically. Like there's something to be said about that long term. And the same players, Spawn fits a lot of that too when you look at him on POA. Like there's just certain players that get this boosted upside retrieval when you do run data. And Sahith is one of those prime examples. You talked about it just a second ago when I came back in. It's this boomer bust outlook from Sahith every single week. But where the boom potential is more likely to come into play would be these West Coast POA sort of venues to where he has the ability to gain 7-8 strokes like he did during Victory and do something to give himself real upside to win. So, look, it goes back to what I said. I personally think he's the second best player in this tournament. I will still go with Wyndham being the best option, but to me, they are the 1A, 1B, no matter how you want to shake it.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I do think, personally, Wyndham is the better. I mean, his track record goes to show. I mean, 3 Ws, big events, major. He's obviously the best from pedigree perspective. Maybe at this specific venue for Sahith, the vibes, there's lots of support out here. I mean, if you think Sahith Theegala's fan club was big enough on the West Coast last year, we got half of continental Asia coming through, and it's going to be a fun time to kind of see what's going on for Sahith Theegala. Transferring from that to gourmet or cray, Spence, this is where we kind of go through the different tiers. We've mentioned already a few guys that are in the 8, 9, and 10K ranges. So go back into the beginning of this video, get our favorite ranges there. Let's start in the 8s, but I'm going to only ask for your cray price tag, Spencer. Is someone overpriced, or is someone crazy to think I'm going to play this guy just based off of what your model ranks for the 8K range?
The worst rated player in the $8,000 range for me, I know he's found decent success at this tournament, so take that for whatever it's worth. Some of the recent form hasn't been quite as great, but Harris English had a lack of upside appeal for me in my sheet. He was 40th overall. I mean, that's going to be a negative value just compared to the overall rank to begin with, but he drops to 75th for me for upside. That is not where you want to be.
Yeah, I've got Harris English in the exact same thing. He's $8,800, top of the 8K range, easily. Like growing up, you see that meme where the 2 sexy daughters and the one daughter that's got like the skull cap on, standing there in the full costume, bathing suit, whatever you want to call it. That's kind of what Harris English is doing in this 8K range, either side of like Eric Cole and even Patrick Rogers, on the East Coast, not the worst option. So now that we know we're not playing in the 8s, who are we playing in the 7s, Spencer? Who is give me 2 options from either side of the $7,500 mark?
I'll go with KH Lee being the best value on the board. Can I cheat here and name a player who's 75 exactly?
Absolutely.
So I think there's a lot of value to consider down in this range. My model like Taylor Montgomery, my model like Hayden Springer. There were a lot of names that popped that I think you can find value, even maybe a little bit lower down into like the Ben Silverman range. But I thought there were, I'll say, 3 players that were the most aggressively backed in my model when I was looking for pure upside for the price tag we were getting. KH Lee's one of them. Rico Hoey, I think that he's a player that I talked about earlier, but I'm going to go with Patrick Fishburne here. This to me might be the spot I'm hoping to where I can get a little bit different, to where your average gamer doesn't know who he is yet. Your more savvy person might jump into him, but this was a name that, I've talked about players recently that closed the year on a strong note, and Fishburne was putting together results there for a while towards the end of the calendar season of the 2000. I don't even know what year we're in right now. I guess it's the end of the 2024 year there, but yeah, I mean, Montgomery is somebody that I always seem to feel like I go back to.
Boom or bust, especially on the West Coast, though. I love him a lot.
Yeah. I think there's a high upside, very low floor with him.
Yes. Yeah. Especially when you take out the longer iron proximities. That's his biggest bugaboo. Yeah. The wedges, he's actually not too shabby. So, yeah. Some interesting names. And you have a lot of 7K guys in your top 10, Spencer. You're going to be leaning into some serious leverage this week, and I kind of fancy it. What are your thoughts on a guy by the name of Andrew Putnam or Sam Stevens?
So I liked Stevens for the distance. You can talk to me about Putnam. I'm probably off of Putnam.
Okay. I think Putnam's just kind of grading out really nicely because of just the short game side of things, the increased accuracy that he has off the tee, has typically played rather nicely at this golf course in the past. So he's like a Brendan Todd wannabe. I think that's, if he's playing his best golf, he can get there. And, he's ranked inside the top 20 in the recent in strokes gained for this last 100 rounds. So I don't mind an Andrew Putnam there. And then I'll dive into the bottom of the sevens, and 2 of my favorite are going to be Jacob Bridgman. I think he's going to Fishburne and Bridgman over there. We just got 2 interesting names, but 2 Corn Ferry Tour guys that have showed up. And I think Jacob Bridgman has been rattling off top 20 finishes at a ridiculous clip. And I think for a $7,400 golfer, 3 of his last 4 starts have been really, really impressive. So again, everyone playing in this tournament never played the BMW Championship or the Tour Championship. That's why they're playing in this tournament, unless you're President Cuppa. So I think it's an interesting avenue to kind of look at, and he's showing the best form out of them all. And then I'll go with Daniel Berger at $7,300. If you take a look at random West Coast performances, I mean, the guy's won out at Pebble. I think a shorter venue like this, where his ball striking can really just kind of unleash, and maybe he finds some putting success on this West Coast style of golf course. I think he came onto tour last year after being injured for a while and burnt the rust off early on the West Coast swing. Never had the opportunity to kind of find the form that we could see from Berger right now. Granted, it's 41st in the field in strokes gained total, but he's 41st in DFS rank. So I'll take that chance. You got to just go with the guy here that I like a lot. I think he's a great option. And then Ben Silverman kind of rounding out that bottom $7,100 range. Like you mentioned, grades 23rd for me in safety, but 50th in upside. We're not getting any top 10s from the Silver Man. So bottom of the barrel guys, Spence, less than $7,500.
I like the Berger call. I think that's a player that we know at his very best, he's one of the 10 best players in this tournament. We've talked a lot about Pebble Beach as a course that there's some corollary that you can find from it. And I mean, that is another name that has taken down that event before. I like the Berger call. The best value for me on the board, just price tag wise, was Ben Silverman, but it's probably Silverman Berger. I don't really think I'm reinventing the wheel necessarily with either one of those 2 names. One is for your safer play, and one is a little bit more for your upside with it. But I think both of them have playability because of their price.
Yeah, I love it, Spence. And as we get out of here, Nate Lashley, Zach Blair, 2 other names I wouldn't necessarily mind throwing into my player pool as we get into the 6s, where there are some fun names. That Ryan Moore at $6,800 is a nice name to me. He's a short course king. Like if you find Ryan Moore at a venue where you can just plot around, played quite nice at the Players a while ago. That's another short plotters kind of venue. I don't mind him. David Skins grades out quite nicely for me too. I mean, from a ball striking perspective, he's doing some good stuff. And then if you want to scoot all the way down, Parker Coody at $6,500 seems like a top 40 upside candidate for me. So, A lot of guys down at the bottom here can struggle, but Parker Cootie can ball strike it to pieces. So, any guys in the sixes that you are a fan of, Spencer?
So there were, well, let me extend this answer a little bit. There were 1, 2, 3, 4. There were 5 guys 7,300 or less that graded inside of the top 65 for every single category that I ran this week.
Oh, wow.
Daniel Berger, Hayden Springer, Carson Young at 71, which was, I talked about this with you a little bit. Like, I don't know what, I have not gotten Carson Young correct this year. So, like, I have lost every matchup. I've lost every placement. I would take that one with the grain of salt with it, but my model did like him. There were 2 golfers in the $6,000 range who presented the same answer for me. David Skins would be one of them. The other one was Troy Merritt. There was a little bit that my model liked about Merritt. You're obviously kind of know what you're signing up for with him, but course history, 3 made cuts in a row, 2 top 16 finishes. The recent stuff, really, really bad. And I think that this is the answer that you need to ask yourself, or the question you need to ask yourself of what is most important, course history or current form. And it's kind of what we talked about with Homa, which is a different standard of a golfer and a different upside of a golfer. But Merritt has consistently found success at this venue. And from a statistical perspective, it's very easy to understand why. Like, I'm always trying to find those names, and Merritt is kind of the blueprint of that, where they don't grade well for me on any given week. They miss a lot of cuts. And then you randomly put them on a course where they're projected, quote unquote, to find success. And they historically have found that level of success. That always piques my curiosity a little bit. So, I don't know what the upside here is, Byron, but, he did get into a top 40-ish fringe sort of an upside play. So if we're talking for a golfer that I don't know what the ownership's going to look like, I think there's worse start throws than him at the very bottom of the board.
And Spencer, when it comes to form over course history, there's a tipping point where the salary scale doesn't even afford you form in this price range. You know what that's why they price down here, is because they've been sucking. Like, they're not going to put someone that's playing good golf in the $6,000 range. So leaning into some course history, taking a gamble on that, hoping that can kind of come around, this is the range to do that, because you got nothing else to glom onto. There might be a few stats here and there that you can lean into and say, okay, this is why he might play well here. But, course history in the $6,000 range is definitely a viable option to kind of differentiate players, because they're all playing poorly. They might have different skill sets, like I said, but I'm cool with that. So some other guys that have some interesting course history. I mean, Stuart Sink, Spencer, still jamming out on the senior tour. Like, this guy's played remarkable golf at this golf course. Sometimes maybe he plays on the PGA Tour events a little too big for him now in his elderly age. I love to make fun of old people on the show, but Stuart Sink at a golf course like this can definitely get it done. So I think he's another sneaky option you can kind of potentially look at. And then, what do you think about Russell Knox? I mean, that's the ultimate course history versus recent form kind of guy.
Yeah, my model thought he was a value also. Like, if we're talking just pure value on the board, him, Roger Sloan, I mean, that's pretty much like the top 2 outside of Ben Silverman that would present that answer. So I don't mind him. And, I talked at the beginning of the show. I'll just throw out a couple other names here. This is not going to be for the faint of heart. These are players, for the most part, that are extremely volatile. But it's in my DraftKings article over at Rotoballer if you want to get all these names. But when I talked about players that, from a skill set perspective for this course, that are projected to be better than their recent strokes gain total at other venues. So players that are a course specific fit here, we'll kind of just put this down into that 7,300 or less range to keep naming golfers. Garrick Higo had a very big increase in my model. Good upside numbers, terrible floor numbers outside of the top 100 for safety. Climbed the top 60 for upside. I know we're talking about a player here that is still not necessarily reaching the high-end marks, but it is a golfer that UNLV, West Coast, can find success at this sort of venue. S.H. Kim, talked about Taylor Montgomery. You mentioned Nate Lashley. He was a name that fit into that mix. Roger Sloan, Dylan Wu, Russell Knox, Ryan Moore. It's kind of a lot of the same hits that we keep talking about. And then if you want to look at the high-end players that present that sort of an upside, it's Thagala. I'll include KH Lee there. It's Max Homa. Those are the names that are maybe not bringing the form. The Gala would be a different answer there, but or not necessarily bringing the statistical form at least. And I think even with the Gala, like take away what he did at the Tour Championship, this hasn't been that great recently. So a lot of my model is picking up on that, but specifically on this venue, there's a reason why he's won the tournament. So those are the names that get much better than the recent form that my model believes that at this course specific outlook should have a better result than at least the market would be indicating, maybe outside of Thagala with that answer, which is the favorite for a reason.
Exactly. Yeah. Top of the board, course history can also be leaned into quite severely at times if you have a bit of reason. Spencer, as we get out of here, Martini 1987 asks us Jordan Mason or Brandon Ayuk in light of Christian McCaffrey being out. You can only play one of them. You need 7 points. What's your take?
I mean, if it's a PPR league, and I don't know what the answer is here, I always lean towards the wide receiver with it. If it's a different sort of an outlook, I mean, we can give a different answer for it. I think if it's just standard, here's my concerns, and we'll talk about the football game for 1 second here. This is a really weird outlook for the 49ers here, and I think it is for a lot of reasons, even before McCaffrey has now decided he's not playing in this game. Look at Robert Saleh. So Robert Saleh is entering this. He has so much understanding of what the 49ers do, and the 49ers have an understanding of what he does. So I think offensively here, the 49ers are going to call a very conservative game plan. You don't want to necessarily get burnt to somebody who knows the ins and outs of what you're doing. I mean, he's a good defensive coach that was a stalwart for them on the defensive end of the ball there. The other problem that comes into play, and I actually don't know where we stand with Trent Williams right now. Like, I assume he is playing. I haven't seen any updates. We've also been on the show for the last hour and 5 minutes. That hurts in general to me. The offensive line, the running game, all of that. So I would not be shocked if we get into a position here to where, I'm not saying aggressive throws, but they have to throw the ball a little bit more. So even though Ayuk is probably on a pitch count, if it's PPR, I'll give the answer there of Ayuk. If it's standard, I guess I'll go with Mason. But I think it would be one of those situations for me that my game type would matter the most.
Yeah. I'm going to go with giving the answer of, if you're looking for floor, I think the primary running back in the San Fran system could get to 7 points, especially against the Jets, where the middle of that field is so much more vulnerable to points being scored. If you take away Sauce, Sauce and DJ Reed are just two of the best corners in the league. Ayuk could go for 20 points this week or tonight, but he could also get locked up. Like if he lands up going up against Sauce and DJ and Trent's not giving Purdy enough time to kind of get the ball out, we could have a problem. But the Jets are also really bad against running backs. They let the running back score a lot of cheap receptions underneath and then just tackle them for 5 yards. So if it's PPR in particular, again, I would probably lean a little bit of Jordan Mason, but it's kind of funny how we both gave two different answers there. But 7 points being needed, I would probably take the guy who's going to get the ball in his hands the most this week.
We gave the same answer in a way of, I think, to me, I view this, like if we're equating this to golf, standard to me is like the cash game safety market, to where that's where I would lean Jordan Mason. Like if we're talking PPR, I think Jordan Mason is going to get to 7 points in a PPR league. I also think Ayuk will end up getting there, but I do agree that at the end of the day, there's probably more volatility that comes into play with Ayuk, but I don't know. I mean, I kind of think they both end up getting there, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think either plays fine. If you needed 20 points, I would definitely say play Brandon Ayuk. Like that's just basically how I would look at it. That answers your question there. Martini 1987. Woo, by the way, thank you for hitting that like button. If you are still watching or not stressing over who you're going to put in the flex because we ignored you for the last 15 minutes. But we appreciate everybody jumping in. Apologies for the slight technical difficulties there. Glad that you could all hear us regardless, though. Monday Night Football, baby. Let's go Jets. Hopefully Aaron Rodgers can make it through more than the first 3 snaps. And if he does, I will be buying his jersey once the game is completed because I'm just too freaking scared to even touch him until anybody does anything well. Let's go. Let's have a great week. Don't forget to sign up for rotoballer.com. Link in the description below. Code Maniac, code TOFF, get you 10% off. Also, we have a deal right now where you can just get the rest of the fall swing, I think $75 for for the rest of the year. Get a good taste for what you're going to see from us coming when 2025 rolls around and the big events are out there. We've got everything for you. Spencer, send us out here.
It's even better than that, Byron. It's 75% off.
75% off.
So you're going to be getting it for, I believe, I don't know. Maybe that still takes you to that number, but
I think $299, I think, is the magic number. But either way, great deal.
So, same deal then. I guess same deal based off of that. But yeah, it's one of the best deals that you're going to find if you've ever wanted to test out what we have going at Rotoballer. This is the time to do it. You're going to get all of our models, all of our picks, all of the in-depth information that we release. So, if you have any questions about it, if you are interested in signing up, definitely reach out to either Byron or myself. We will get you hooked up with everything. We will get you inside of the Discord chat also. That is something that I know both of us are very proud that we're growing in there. We have a big group to where, look, people come to you and I, Byron, and ask questions, but our Discord is a lot more than that. It's a Discord community of like-minded people that are asking very smart questions to one another and are answering questions. So if you've ever wanted to get better, like, look, the model and the numbers part of it will always make you a better bettor or a better DFS player. But even just that deep talk about DFS or betting and getting the insight of not only people like ourselves and Joe Idoni and Ian and Joe Nicely and everybody that's included. It's the ability to interact with everybody else who's in that chat. I think in general, we have a really sharp group of people in there, and there's a lot of good conversations and great discussions that happen every single week. So you'll get that Discord that I know we're very proud of. So you can sign up, hop in there, get all our picks, get all our models. We hope you consider taking advantage of that.
Yes. And if you love all sports like we do, Rotoballer's got everything. NFL, MLB, NHL, the whole freaking shebang. NASCAR, freaking gaming. We've even got gaming. So we've got it all for you guys. You can get the full package there too and whatever. So we appreciate you guys for tuning in. Hit the subscribe button on the way out. Don't forget to tickle that like button. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks' time for the President's Cup. So that'll be a fun time. I will be in Montreal. That's going to be a great, great time. We'll catch you guys